Hey guys, so is the average PC still going to cut it in today's gaming world? Let's find out. So guys, last week or the week before I did a video where I looked at the average gaming PC, and for that I looked at Steam, and it turned out that most people are still running a quad core with 8 gigs, 1080p display, and a mid-range card like a 970 or an RX 290 or something like that anyway. So I decided to do some testing. So I have a machine that kind of fits the bill. So you should be able to see it on the screen now. Now the specs up there, so I know it's an i7, but everything else is kind of what you would find on Steam. 1080p display, 8 gigs of RAM, and a GTX 970. Now what we did was we went into the BIOS and we disabled hyper-threading, so now the chip will act like an i5. It will only use its 4 physical cores. So I think that's a pretty good proxy for a kind of quad core that people will be using on Steam. Plus, this thing runs at 3.6 gigahertz, so it should be absolutely fine. It will turbo up to 4, but that's not really that fast, I don't think. So with that out of the way, let's move on. So for benchmarking, it's all done as normal. Everything I've done is done 3 times, exactly the same with an average taken. And bear in mind that all the benchmarking is done in this with absolutely no overclocking. So the CPU, the memory, and the GPU are all running at stock. So without further ado, let's see how this machine gets on. Hey guys, so I hope you can see from that actually that quad core with 8 gigs of RAM and a kind of mid-range GPU is actually still doing the job pretty well. I mean, the Cinebench score was a bit low, but that's kind of what I expected, and I did that more for my own curiosity. But really, you shouldn't let that worry you. The Heaven score was pretty good. The minimums were a bit low, but on average, it dealt pretty well with Heaven, bearing in mind that was at the Ultra preset. And then moving on to gaming, I mean, this thing was absolutely fine. So I picked GPU and CPU intensive games, and it was pretty good with all of them. The only thing it kind of really struggled with was the Metro 2033 benchmark. The one thing that I didn't like about that was the minimums were quite low, but the average would give you a perfectly acceptable playing experience. Similarly, for Rise of the Tomb Raider performed very well, which I was also quite surprised about. With Doom, no shocker there, Doom is very well optimized, performed perfectly well, very nice experience playing that game. Total War Warhammer was a funny one. I was surprised at the dips when you look at the graph at the end of the footage there, but bear in mind that this is a very CPU intensive game, so again, that's probably not the GPU limiting it, that's probably the the GPU having to wait for the CPU to make draw calls. But again, if you were playing the game, I think it would be a perfectly good experience. You know, this was all run at ultra. I mean, so you'd have to drop it down to very high or high. It would still look great. You'd still have a very good experience. So all in all, if you're running one of these average machines, I wouldn't feel the pressure to run out and buy new hardware. I know lots of companies are saying you need to move to DDR4. You need to move on to a new chipset, like in terms of Intel or AMD. The only caveat I would add to that, well, there's two, is number one, if you're running an FX chip, go out and buy a Ryzen CPU and a board. You will notice a massive difference. You'll have a much better experience. And number two, the only other reason to change your hardware is if you're going to change what you're doing. So if you're going to change from a gamer to someone who wants to do some streaming or some light editing or something like that, then yes, you probably want to invest in an i7 if you're on Intel, or again, if you're in AMD, you want to invest in one of the R5, the Ryzen 5 chips. I think offer the best value at the moment. So with that being said, guys, that's it. I'm done. I'm very surprised, quite happy that quad cores are still doing it for people. So that's it. That is it for me, guys. So if you liked the video, be sure to like it. If you don't like it, there's not much I can do about that now. If you're new to the channel, don't forget to subscribe. If you're already a subscriber, please share the content. Let's get the channel growing. And guys, I'll catch you again in another great video. Bye!